Hey everyone. Tonight, we step behind the veil into the hidden world of an Ottoman harem. Often dismissed as rumor or fantasy, the truth is far more complex, a realm of power, politics, beauty, and ruthless competition, all confined within the golden walls of the imperial palace. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always amazing to see who's joining us from across the globe. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft ambient hum. Let's begin tonight's journey together. You've just woken up inside the Topkapi Palace harem. The good news: you're surrounded by silk, satin, and rose-scented water. The bad news: you're also surrounded by 200 other concubines, any of whom might be plotting to outshine, outmaneuver, or even outlive you. You blink awake on a cushion so finely embroidered it looks like it was stitched by blind angels using golden thread, because it probably was. You'd think all this would feel luxurious. It doesn't. It feels like pressure. Constant, velvety pressure. A bell rings, not for prayer, but for grooming. You have exactly 10 minutes to make your face look effortlessly flawless. In Ottoman terms, paint it like a Renaissance masterpiece and smile like you mean it. There's rose oil for your skin, crushed pearls for your cheeks, and enough kohl eyeliner to write a love letter across your lids. Mascara, invented by disappointment, applied with a twig. Privacy? Never heard of her. Your chamber is shared with women who may adore you like sisters, or scheme against you like corporate villains. Gossip spreads faster than royal decrees. Alliances are forged over pomegranate seeds. Betrayals start with a misplaced hairpin. And the scent: imagine a fog of jasmine mixed with anxiety, incense, and the ever-present hope of catching the Sultan's eye. If Chanel released a perfume called Ambition and Claustrophobia, this would be it. You rise, smooth your embroidered kaftan, hand-washed by a servant girl who's 12 but already seems to despise you, and head to morning roll call. Senior eunuchs decide which concubines will be summoned to the Sultan's chambers. It's like a beauty pageant, where the prize is existential dread. No, you can't leave. Yes, someone is always watching. Your survival depends on staying fascinating, fragrant, and fertile. Welcome to your day in the Ottoman Imperial Harem, where your first breath is a power play, your smile is strategy, and your bed is softer than freedom. And trust us, it only gets stranger from here. Next stop, the hammam, the steam-filled spa where imperial politics unfold, naked. You might assume this place is just for hygiene. Technically, yes, but in the harem, everything has a second purpose. The bathhouse is where alliances form, rivalries simmer, and everything smells faintly of lavender, lemons, and passive aggression. Concubines file in like graceful ghosts, wrapped in embroidered towels. You follow suit, pretending this isn't the most nerve-wracking nudity you've ever experienced. Senior women glide through the marble halls like swans, beautiful, serene, and utterly territorial. Their skin, impossibly perfect. Yours, not so much. Attendants scrub you down with something that almost feels like affection, until you realize it's a loofah soaked in vengeance. Your skin tingles, your dignity retreats. You avoid eye contact, hoping no one notices how new you are. You learn quickly. The bath is more than a bath. It's surveillance in disguise. Who sits beside whom? Who whispers? Who laughs too hard at the Valide Sultan's niece's joke? It all matters. You don't speak much. You're still learning the rules. Talking too soon in the hammam is like opening a chess match by flipping the board. The veterans either ignore you or silently mark you for correction, usually in the form of chores or social exile. Still, the hammam gives you your first real glimpse into the harem's soft power. You overhear stories, half-whispered, half-truth, of women who rose not just by the Sultan's favor, but by knowing the right bath attendant, the right older concubine, and telling the right story at the right moment. It's also the only place where secrets slip out, between splashes of water and drops of scented oil. You hear who's favored, who hasn't been summoned in months, and which eunuch allegedly dropped a forbidden love note. All of this happens while someone scrubs your elbows like they're personally offended by them. You leave the hammam pink, polished, and about 12% more paranoid than when you arrived. Congratulations. Your skin glows. Your mind is clouded with heat, jasmine, and the politics of proximity. If you thought the harem was all silk cushions and distant flute music, how sweet. But by now, you've learned it's less like a day spa and more like a slow motion chess game. The pieces are beautiful, bored, and dangerously informed. And then there are the eunuchs, specifically the black eunuchs, the high ranking castrated guards who report directly to the Valide Sultan. They control access to the harem. They decide who enters, who leaves, who's summoned, ignored, or vanishes without a trace, never to be spoken of again. They rarely smile. They don't need to. Their presence alone can end the career. So you learn fast. If you want to survive, or better yet, thrive, you don't flatter the Sultan. You befriend the eunuchs. Not with gifts, that's suspicious. Not with flirtation, that's deeply awkward. Instead, you earn their trust through subtlety, patience, and understanding the unspoken rules of the palace. Because in the Ottoman harem, power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears a robe and carries a key, and wildly inappropriate number. The trick is to be respectful, predictable, and above all, inoffensively useful. You ask for nothing. You're always ready when summoned. You never, ever gossip about them, because news travels in this palace faster than the plague, and you really don't want your name attached to a sentence that ends in, and then she was transferred to the laundry chamber. Meanwhile, among the concubines, relationships are complicated. You've made one tentative friend, a girl from Seracia who pretends to like embroidery, but is clearly plotting something long-term and ruthless. You also have an enemy, though you're not sure why. She stared at you too long during lute practice. You blinked. She hasn't spoken to you since. Everything is subtle. Compliments are weapons. Smiles are loaded. You begin to miss the emotional simplicity of your old village goat. But you learn. You learn how to interpret silence, how to stand just close enough to power without looking ambitious, how to thank a eunuch for handing you a letter as if he just handed you a divine scroll. And most of all, you learn that survival here isn't about being the prettiest or the most talented. It's about understanding how power moves, in glances, in silence, in the way someone's name is spoken one day and not the next. At first glance, your job as a concubine seems simple. Look beautiful, smile politely, and waft through the palace like an emotionally available ghost in silk slippers. But in reality, you're now expected to master the oldest imperial skill of them all, absorbing everything while appearing to absorb nothing. You are a sponge, a bejeweled, perfumed sponge who embroiders a suspicious number of tulips while memorizing who sits where, who glares at whom, and who got an extra apricot at breakfast. Subtle changes in fruit distribution. In this palace, it's practically a coup. Your daily schedule now includes hours of training that sounds like finishing school, but smells like political grooming. You're taught music, literature, poetry, Islamic law, Ottoman etiquette, and, if you're lucky, how not to pass out during dance lessons. The idea is to be beautiful, yes, but also charmingly clever without being threatening, like a decorative peacock that can quote Rumi and doesn't talk back. The real education, though, happens in between. You learn to notice how long it takes the Valide Sultan's tray to be cleared, and who clears it. You note which eunuch walks in just before bad news arrives. You memorize who's absent. You never ask why. You listen more than you speak. Actually, you don't speak unless someone 3 ranks above you asks you to. Even then, you keep it brief, ideally with a comment that's humble, insightful, and somehow flattering to them without sounding like you're trying. And while you sit there with your hands neatly folded over your embroidery, which may or may not be a misshapen dove, You are quietly archiving every interaction in your mental scroll: alliances, slights, opportunities, names, especially names. You also begin to understand the unspoken ranking system: who is favored, who is tolerated, who is three skipped meals away from being reassigned to kitchen duty. You are currently somewhere between interesting newcomer and acceptable wall furnishing. Don't worry, that's better than it sounds. Because the truth is, in the Ottoman Harem, looking harmless is one of the most dangerous things you can do, and you're starting to do it quite well. There are two kinds of fear in the harem: the fear of being overlooked and the fear of being noticed. Today, you are flirting dangerously with the second. It begins innocently. You are handed a new robe, not the usual subtle gray-blue cotton you've worn for weeks, but something far too bold. Silk rose-colored, embroidered with tiny golden vines. You stare at it like it just proposed to you. From the Valide Sultan's steward, the servant girl mutters, eyes down. This could mean anything. Maybe you're being rewarded. Maybe you're being tested. Maybe it was meant for another concubine, and you're now walking into someone else's assassination plot. With very soft sleeves. You put it on. It fits suspiciously well. As you pass through the harem corridors, the other women notice, not openly, that would be beneath them, but with precisely timed pauses in conversation, raised brows, and one glance so sharp it could cut embroidery thread. You sit for morning recitation, with your posture a little straighter. You pretend not to notice that you've been placed slightly closer to the front, not directly next to the favored ones, but not with the wallpaper girls either. Then there's the rose. Later that afternoon, a eunuch delivers a single pink rose to your quarters. Just one. No message. No explanation. You hold it like it might detonate. In palace code, this could mean anything. The Sultan might have noticed you, or someone wants it to look that way, or maybe you're being set up for palace gossip. The deadliest game of telephone in Ottoman history. The safest move. You press the rose between the pages of your prayer book and tell absolutely no one, not even your shadow, especially not your shadow. She gossips. You go to bed that night draped in rose silk, feeling like a target inside a Valentine's Day card. Here in the harem, rising too quickly is suspicious. Standing out is dangerous, but disappearing, that's worse. So you hold your posture, sip your sherbet, and prepare for whatever this robe and rose combination means, because it might be everything or it might be nothing. And in this place, both are equally terrifying. Dinner in the harem isn't dinner. It's theater. Competitive, highly seasoned theater, where everyone wears silk and pretends they're not sizing up their enemies between bites of stewed lamb. You enter the great dining chamber and take your seat. Not too close to the center, you haven't earned that, and not too far in the shadows. You're not invisible yet. The seating arrangement is an ever-shifting map of status. 1 week, you're near the lute player who knows everyone's secrets. The next, you're next to a woman who hasn't spoken since 1572. The food arrives on trays carried by silent eunuchs. Bowls of saffron rice, pomegranate-studded pilaf, grape leaves, sweet sherbets in crystal glasses. All of it delicate, flavorful, and somehow emotionally threatening. No one rushes. That would be vulgar. You nibble slowly, gracefully, like someone who doesn't even really need food because she is nourished by poetry and intrigue alone. Conversations are hushed. Nobody laughs too loud unless they're trying to send a message. I'm confident enough to be cheerful in this snake pit. You nod politely. You smile just enough. You do not, under any circumstance, ask for more bread. Hunger is weakness. So is gluttony. Also, someone might be watching to see if you take 2 figs. You catch eyes with another concubine across the table. She's new, or maybe she's old and reborn with a better tailor. Either way, her earrings are too large for her rank, and her smile is the kind that comes with long-term plans. You break eye contact before she decides you're a problem. Then comes the part no one ever admits, watching the eunuch enter. When he steps in, the air shifts. If he heads your way, A letter, an invitation, anything. You remain perfectly calm on the outside. Internally, your soul may or may not be breakdancing. If he doesn't, you nod, as if this suits you just fine. You didn't want to be summoned anyway. You're busy chewing suspiciously decorative grapes. By the end of dinner, nothing has happened, and everything has happened. Power has changed hands in eyebrow lifts and polite laughter. You rise, you bow, you leave. Still hungry, still smiling, still in the game. You try to sleep, which is adorable, because the harem at night is like a theater stage after the performance. Dim, hushed, but still full of tension. The lanterns flicker low. The fountains murmur outside. And you lie awake wondering if tonight is the night a eunuch knocks on your door. You know the rules. The Sultan chooses in secret, sometimes with intent, sometimes impulsively, sometimes because he saw a girl drop a fig with particular elegance. There is no pattern, no logic, just anticipation and silk-robed anxiety. Around you, the other women pretend to sleep. One breathes too loudly. Another keeps adjusting her veil like it might protect her from bad news or good luck. Everyone's pretending not to care. You care. Of course you care. You were handed a rose 2 days ago, and you're still trying to decide if it was a compliment or a warning. Maybe both, maybe neither. Palace communication is like poetry, written by a committee of spies. Suddenly, soft footsteps. A door creaks. Somewhere, a eunuch whispers a name, not yours. You exhale, relief, disappointment, a cocktail of both, served in an emotional silver goblet. You roll over and close your eyes, only for your mind to start staging imaginary conversations with the Sultan in 3 different languages, all of which you're still learning. You dream, but not of home. That place is blurry now. You dream of the woman across the dining table with the earrings, too large for her rank. She smiles at you in the dream. You wake up, certain she wants you demoted, exiled, or, at the very least, stuck in lute lessons for the rest of your natural life. You dab rose water under your nose and pretend it's calming. It isn't, but it smells like control. At some point, just before dawn, you finally drift off. You've survived another night without being chosen, without being erased, without accidentally looking too eager or too dull. And in the palace of Topkapi, that's not sleep. That's a diplomatic victory. There are 2 stories whispered in the harem. One is the fairy tale, where the Sultan notices you, and your life is transformed by luxury, influence, and the occasional diamond the size of a walnut. The other is what actually happens. The Sultan, ruler of an empire that stretches from Hungary to Arabia, may or may not remember your name. You are one of hundreds. He could have summoned you because you look like a painting he once saw, or because his coffee tasted a bit too bitter, and he's in the mood for distraction. When the eunuch knocks on your door after nightfall, he doesn't explain. He just bows. You rise, silently, heart pounding in your ears like a royal drumline. You are led through halls lit by lanterns and scented with sandalwood. A path hundreds have walked, but only a few have returned from with stories worth surviving. You arrive at a chamber where your reflection stares back from polished brass and tile mosaics. A final attendant adjusts your veil, adds one more drop of oil behind your ears, and gives you a look that says, "Smile, but not too much. Speak, but only if spoken to. And for the love of Allah, don't trip." You enter, and there he is, the Sultan, the man you've trained for, feared, imagined, and maybe accidentally dreamed about during Quran lessons. He is wearing silk robes and an unreadable expression. He says, "Your name, the new one, not the one your mother gave you." He asks where you're from. You lie gracefully. You talk about poetry. He nods. Then he hands you a fig. What does it mean? Everything in the harem is a metaphor, and this fruit is no different. Is it a test of refinement, an invitation, a subtle indication of dietary preference? You take the fig, peel it gently, and offer a reply that sounds both elegant and mysterious. Something about sweet things hiding bitterness. You hope it sounds deep. It might just sound hungry. The night passes in conversation, music, and the occasional silence that feels like a judgment. When you are dismissed, it's with a nod. You are escorted back alone, intact, and thoroughly bewildered. You have been noticed. And now, things are about to get complicated. You returned just before dawn, walking softer than usual, as if stepping too loudly might break whatever spell you were briefly under. You slept, sort of. More accurately, you reclined next to the most powerful man in the empire and tried very hard not to sweat through your perfume. You were charming, you think. You definitely said something about poetry, or maybe goats. You're not sure anymore. The eunuchs say nothing when you pass. That's good. Silence is always preferable to a knowing smirk. Back in the harem, the air smells different. Same jasmine incense, same rose oil in the hallway, but now it's seasoned with something new. Attention. The concubines don't look at you directly. That would be crass. But you feel their glances bounce off your shoulders like decorative daggers. At breakfast, your seating has changed. A little closer to the center. Not too obvious, but enough to say she might be relevant now. Your sherbet is slightly colder than everyone else's. It's the little luxuries that reveal everything. You're still you. Still technically low in rank. Still expected to attend lessons. Still responsible for folding far too many embroidered towels. But now, you're under surveillance. Not by the palace guards, by everyone else. Girls who never spoke to you before suddenly want to share their favorite verses from Persian poetry. A servant accidentally leaves a pomegranate on your tray, a fruit associated with fertility, which is about as subtle as dropping a baby cradle in your lap. Even your enemies become more polite. They nod slightly. Their eyes, however, remain sharp and amused, like cats watching a candle. The older concubines offer no expression at all. They've seen this before. Some of them were you 5 years ago. One or two still might be. You spend the rest of the day doing what the harem trains you to do best, appearing neutral. You speak when addressed. You smile just enough. You move like you belong here, because now you sort of do. But the real trick, not letting anyone know how you feel, because in this palace, emotion is a currency, and yours is under heavy exchange. You've stepped onto the palace ladder. Now, the one no one talks about, but everyone's scrambling up in their softest slippers. It doesn't lean against the wall. It floats, shifts, and sometimes snaps in half under the weight of ambition. The first step, survive the attention. Your name, your new, government-issued Ottoman name, is whispered more often now. Not loudly, of course, just enough that you begin to feel like a character in someone else's play. One day, you're complimented on your embroidery by a concubine who previously thought you were part of the furniture. The next, you're offered fig paste by someone who'd rather poison you than promote your breakfast. You decline politely. You've also been reassigned to a new chamber. It has 2 extra cushions, better lighting, and a mirror that doesn't distort your face into a medieval fresco. That's not generosity. That's a signal. You're rising, slowly, like steam in the hammam, visible, fleeting, and occasionally scalding. And so begins the dangerous balancing act known as strategic modesty. If you act too pleased, you're arrogant. If you act too humble, you're manipulative. If you trip on your robes and faceplant into the prayer mat, okay, that's just unfortunate, but they'll still talk about it. The Valide Sultan, the mother of the Sultan and CEO of all that glitters, starts to notice you. Not directly, of course, but her steward now nods at you in the hallway. That's basically an endorsement, or a warning, possibly both. Meanwhile, your peers begin dividing into categories. The friendly opportunists, the silent threats, and one terrifying girl who seems to live entirely on melanin and revenge. You learn to navigate them all with smiles that say, I respect you, and eyes that whisper, but I will absolutely outlive you. Pearls appear on your collarbone one morning, small ones at the collar, a gift or a test, or just pearls. You wear them carefully, like armor with excellent luster. Every gesture matters now. How you walk, how you bow, how long you hold someone's gaze. This isn't flirtation. This is diplomacy. In slippers. You're climbing gently, carefully, and if you fall, the floor is paved with other girls who once had pearls too. There are moments in palace life that make your pulse trip over itself. Being summoned by the Sultan is one. Being noticed by the Valide Sultan, that's a different league entirely. She doesn't just run the harem, she is the harem. Architect of alliances, keeper of traditions, benevolent grandmother one moment, political thunderstorm the next. And today, she looks at you. Not a passing glance, not a polite acknowledgement, a full, direct, measured look. The kind of look that suggests she knows where you came from, where you're going, and how you chew your melon slices. You respond the only acceptable way. You panic internally. Externally, you bow with mechanical precision, lower your gaze just enough to show respect but not subservience, and immediately begin questioning every outfit you've worn in the past month. Later, a steward arrives with a message. You are invited to assist with one of the Valide's charitable sewing projects. Translation: she wants to observe you in a room full of older, sharper women who can detect ambition at 500 paces. You arrive on time. Not too early. That's desperate. Not too late. That's suicidal. She sits surrounded by cushions, embroidery hoops, and the kind of silence that dares you to speak first. You don't. You thread a needle and pretend this doesn't feel like a job interview disguised as domestic servitude. The other women chat politely. The Valide listens. Occasionally, she asks a question. Where were you educated? What's your favorite surah? Have you ever met anyone who truly understands politics? You answer carefully, gracefully, as if your entire future depends on it, because it does. At one point, she smiles, not at you, near you, which is basically the same thing. When it's over, you bow again and exit with the calm of someone who has no idea whether they've just been promoted or marked for reassignment to towel duty. Back in your chamber, your roommate stares at you like you've just returned from riding a dragon. She looked at you. She whispers. You nod, smiling faintly. You don't say it aloud, but yes, and you're still sweating. There's a knock at your chamber door, not the gentle knock of a friend or the impatient tap of a eunuch carrying towels. This one is deliberate, the kind of knock that comes with consequences. A message is handed to you. You are invited to a private tea by one of the Sultan's favorite consorts. Her name is whispered through the harem like a lullaby, sung with a knife in it. She is powerful, poised, and, depending on who you ask, either your best chance at survival or the reason girls disappear mysteriously during lunch. You accept. Of course you do, because saying no in the harem is about as effective as throwing a fig at a cavalry charge. You dress with mathematical care, not too extravagant. She might think you're challenging her. Not too plain. She might think you're insulting her. You settle on elegance with plausible humility and add a hairpin that says, I'm competent, but not plotting yet. The tea room is small, perfumed, and intimidatingly silent. She sits alone, reclining like someone who invented reclining. Her robe is embroidered with threads that probably cost more than your hometown. She gestures for you to sit. You do, gracefully, quietly, with just enough bow to imply difference, but not desperation. She pours the tea herself. That's either very generous or very symbolic, possibly both. What follows is a masterclass in veiled threats and indirect compliments. She tells you she's heard you've caught the attention of some influential eyes. She says it like you've accidentally adopted a stray panther. She smiles when you respond. You do not know if she likes your answer or if she's marking you for later. You talk of poetry, music, and carefully curated palace routines. She nods often. Occasionally, she glances at the door, as if calculating whether you're worth her time or just another chapter in her scrapbook of rising starlets. After the second cup, she dismisses you with a smile that could launch or sink a career. You return to your chamber exhausted and slightly unsure whether you've been recruited, warned, or subtly claimed. Either way, someone very important now knows your name, and that is both your greatest asset and your newest liability. By now, you've learned that words in the harem are like spices, used sparingly and always with purpose. Say too much and you're exposed. Say too little and you're forgotten. But if you say just enough and let silence do the rest, that's when you become dangerous. Today's lesson begins in the music chamber, where a group of senior concubines gathers to discuss poetry, philosophy, and, let's be honest, each other. You are invited to sit in, not speak, sit, a test disguised as hospitality. You arrive on time, offer the required courtesies, and fold yourself neatly into the corner like a well-mannered napkin. You sip your sherbet. You nod occasionally. You look interested, but not eager. You laugh softly at one joke, just enough to seem human. And then it happens. One of the elder women turns to you and asks a question. Not a trap, not yet. Just a simple inquiry about your thoughts on a Rumi verse. But you know what this is. They're not testing your taste in poetry. They're testing your timing. You pause long enough to seem thoughtful. Not so long that it looks like you're scrambling for a safe answer. Then you say something that sounds reflective, reverent, and above all, vague. They nod. They are satisfied. You've passed. Later, you are asked again. This time about the Valide Sultan's new charitable initiative. You say nothing critical. You compliment the elegance of the idea without claiming to understand the politics behind it. You use words like humbling and visionary. You are playing verbal chess with invisible queens. The truth is, most power in the harem is held in silence, in the glance that lingers, in the smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, in the pause before someone replies, where everyone leans in just slightly to see which direction the wind is blowing. You leave that room having said less than a dozen sentences, and somehow your name is on 3 more lips than it was yesterday. You're not just surviving now, you're learning to glide wordlessly, precisely, and beautifully through a world where stillness speaks louder than declarations, and the walls, they're still listening. You find a gift on your pillow. No note, no signature, just a small velvet box tied with a ribbon the color of dried rose petals and possibly veiled judgment. You open it slowly, as one opens anything in the harem, halfway expecting perfume, halfway expecting scorpions. It's jewelry, a delicate bracelet inlaid with turquoise and gold filigree. Beautiful, elegant, alarming, because nothing here is ever just a gift. You scan the room. Your roommate raises an eyebrow. She does not ask questions. She's either very polite or very invested in plausible deniability. The bracelet is undoubtedly expensive, too expensive for a casual trinket, not quite royal enough to be from the Sultan, which narrows it down to someone wealthy, calculating, and interested in controlling the narrative. Or you wear it. Of course you do. That's the game. By mid-morning, the rumors begin. She received the gift, someone whispers at the fountain. From whom? Someone else replies. She didn't say. Comes the answer, which, in this place, is the same as saying everyone should assume the worst or most interesting option. You maintain your expression, a calm mix of modesty, confusion, and mild boredom. Meanwhile, your internal monologue is doing cartwheels through every past conversation, searching for enemies, allies, and anyone with a taste for turquoise. By lunchtime, the gossip has mutated. You've allegedly received a secret message, a hidden proposal, and an heirloom passed down from the Valide Sultan herself. All untrue, all dangerously believable. Then comes the whispered warning. A servant girl, low-ranked, easily ignored, drops your tray and mutters, "Careful who puts things in your hand when they can't say it to your face." You thank her, because that's what you do when someone warns you indirectly of possible sabotage while pretending to be clumsy. You keep the bracelet on, but you sleep with it tucked under your pillow, just in case. In the harem, a gift is rarely a gesture of affection. It's a test, a leash, a label, or a gentle reminder that your name is being spoken in rooms you haven't entered yet. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can wear is not a smile, but proof that someone wants to claim you. One morning, just before the call to prayer, you're summoned, not by a eunuch, not by a servant, but by a letter, sealed in imperial blue wax, delivered with no explanation, just a glance that suggests everything is about to change. You sit alone as you read it. The script is elegant. The offer is clear. You are to be elevated, moved to more private quarters, closer to the Sultan, closer to the core of the palace, and further from anonymity. It is, on paper, a promotion. But here in the harem, a promotion is just a prettier word for exposure. Except, now you step into the world of real influence, politics, intrigue, the possibility of bearing a royal child, of becoming a consort, maybe even the Sultan's favorite. It's what some women dream of. It's also where women vanish. You have until sunset to reply. So you walk the gardens, the ones where you used to hide, in the shadow of elder concubines. Now they look smaller. The fountains still whisper. The tulips still bloom like delicate secrets. But the air feels different. It's your name they speak now. You think of home, blurry now. You think of the other girls, the ones who never rose, the ones who rose too fast, the ones who were clever but not clever enough. And you think of yourself, not the version trained in etiquette and poetry, but the girl who arrived with her old name tucked somewhere between her ribs. That night, you dress carefully. One final choice. You walk past the curtains, the silken borders that separate the known from the unknown. And in the stillness, you answer. Maybe you rise. Maybe you vanish. Maybe your name is written into palace history. Or maybe it's whispered one last time and folded away like a silk scarf in a drawer no one opens anymore. But one thing is certain. You were not just a decoration. You were a strategist in satin, a survivor in perfume, a masterclass in restraint. And for one full day, and maybe longer, you walked the tightrope between power and peril without falling. Long before comic books and Hollywood blockbusters, the ancient world already had its own Amazon, and they were terrifyingly real. Meet the Scythian women, horse-riding, bow-wielding warriors of the Eurasian steppe, who didn't just defy gender norms. They reloaded and galloped right over them. The Scythians were a nomadic people who roamed what is now Ukraine, southern Russia, and parts of Central Asia. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote of fierce Amazon women who mated with Scythian men and birthed a tribe of warriors. For centuries, scholars chalked that up to Greek imagination and a little too much wine. But recent archaeology tells a different story, one with bone-deep proof. Excavations of Scythian burial mounds, or kurgans, have uncovered the remains of women buried with full warrior regalia, swords, spears, quivers of arrows, and even battle scars. One teenager's skeleton discovered in the Alai region had arrowheads embedded in her spine, a grim but undeniable sign that she fought and died in combat. Some were laid to rest with their horses, clad in armor. These weren't ceremonial props. They were used and worn. This was a culture that didn't just allow women to fight, it expected them to. Scythian society, unlike most of its ancient contemporaries, wasn't rigidly patriarchal. While men raided and hunted, women often did the same. Girls were trained from a young age to ride and shoot, and elite females could hold positions of influence. There are even signs that Scythian priestesses held spiritual authority, making them both feared in battle and revered in ritual. The Greeks were both fascinated and horrified. They created the myth of the Amazon, wild warrior women who hated men and lived apart from civilization. But the core of the legend was grounded in their encounters with the Scythian women. These women didn't match the submissive, domestic ideal of the Greek woman. They were alien, powerful, and therefore mythologized. So next time someone says female warriors are just a fantasy trope, remind them the Scythians beat us to it by about 2,500 years, and their legacy is written not in legend, but in arrow-pierced skeletons and iron-tipped truths buried beneath the steppe. If you think battlefield leadership was strictly a man's game, then you haven't met the queens of Africa. These weren't pampered palace figures lounging in silk. These were battle-hardened rulers who led armies, negotiated treaties, and stared down empires without flinching. And they didn't just participate in warfare, they redefined it. Take Queen Amanirenas of Kush, for example. In the 1st century BCE, the Roman Empire, fresh from annexing Egypt, made the tactical error of trying to extend its grip further south into Nubia. Amanirenas, a one-eyed queen who had already fought in battle, had other plans. She rallied her people, launched a series of counter-attacks, and even captured Roman forts. One statue of Augustus, she had it decapitated and buried under her temple steps, a deliciously unsubtle message. Eventually, Rome backed off and negotiated peace. That's right, one of the most powerful empires in history was forced to make nice with a one-eyed warrior queen. And she wasn't alone. Across Africa, female leaders often doubled as military commanders. In the 16th century, Queen Amina of Zazzau, in what is now Nigeria, led cavalry raids across hostile lands. According to oral tradition, she expanded her territory further than any ruler before or after her. Amina built walls around cities, developed trade routes, and more importantly, never let her gender limit her battlefield authority. Her soldiers respected her, not just because she was queen, but because she could probably outfight most of them. Further south, the kingdom of Dahomey was protected by the Ahosi, an all-female military regiment the French later nicknamed the Dahomey Amazons. These were not symbolic guards. They were frontline fighters, trained from childhood in weaponry, endurance, and discipline. They served as elite royal protectors and often led charges in battle. Some accounts even described them as more aggressive than their male counterparts, possibly because they had more to prove, or maybe because they just enjoyed the job. These women weren't rare exceptions. In many African societies, women were expected to be capable, politically, economically, and militarily. They negotiated with colonizers, resisted conquest, and commanded troops. Their existence wasn't radical, it was cultural. So the next time someone says history was written by men with swords, you might want to add, sure, but some of those swords were held by queens. When you picture ancient Greece or Rome at war, it's usually rows of male soldiers in bronze armor marching off to battle. But stay behind the front lines, and you'll find a different kind of warrior. One who didn't wear a tunic into combat, but picked up a weapon when the city gates were about to fall. Women in both Greek and Roman societies were often forced into defensive roles, and they didn't hesitate to rise to the occasion. In classical Athens, women were officially excluded from military service. Their roles were mostly domestic, religious, or symbolic. But when invaders came knocking, those lines blurred fast. During the Persian Wars, for example, Greek women acted as logistical support, running supplies, caring for the wounded, and in some desperate cases, throwing roof tiles from the city walls onto enemy troops. Not exactly the glamorous side of battle, but it made a difference. The siege of Plataea in 429 BCE offers one striking moment. Women trapped inside the city took up arms, fought alongside the remaining defenders, and according to Thucydides, played a vital role in the resistance. These weren't trained soldiers. They were citizens turned fighters. But war doesn't always wait for training. Over in Rome, women were technically barred from military engagement, and yet Roman history is littered with tales of women taking charge when things fell apart. In the sack of Rome by the Gauls in 390 BCE, women reportedly negotiated with the invaders, offered their jewelry to fund defense efforts, and helped rally morale. During later conflicts like the Second Punic War, Roman women often followed their husbands to military camps, some even acting as informal strategists or advisors. One particularly notable tale comes from the sack of Rome in 410 CE. As all Alaric's Visigoths stormed the city, noble women like Proba and others are said to have opened their estates as places of refuge, armed their servants, and coordinated resistance within the urban chaos. These weren't passive victims. They were active participants in defense and survival. In the ancient world, warfare wasn't just fought with swords on a battlefield. It was fought with quick thinking, courage, and sometimes sheer desperation. And women were right there in the thick of it, defending their homes when no one else could. If you were a Roman governor in Britannia around 60 CE, your worst nightmare had a name, and it was Boudica. She wasn't just a queen. She was a force of vengeance, fire, and fury, with a knack for rallying an entire population of angry Britons into open revolt against the world's most powerful empire. Boudica ruled the Iceni tribe in eastern Britain. After her husband, King Prasutagus, died, he left his kingdom jointly to his daughters and the Roman Empire, an attempt to secure peace. Rome, being Rome, ignored the will, annexed the territory outright, publicly flogged Boudica, and, in an act so horrific it's still discussed today, had her daughters assaulted. This wasn't just political domination. It was humiliation, and Boudica would not let that stand. What followed wasn't a minor rebellion. It was an all-out war. Boudica became the face of the uprising, leading a coalition of tribes in a scorched earth campaign that shook Roman control to its core. First stop, Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, a Roman town that was utterly razed. Then Londinium, modern-day London, burned to ash. Verulamium, modern St. Albans, same fate. The Roman historian Cassius Dio described her as tall, terrifying, with a mane of red hair and a fierce presence that stirred her warriors into a frenzy. Tacitus, meanwhile, emphasized her eloquence and leadership, describing how she addressed her troops not as a noble woman, but as a mother wronged and a warrior awakened. Though she had early victories, Boudica's army eventually faced a professional Roman force under Governor Suetonius Paulinus. Outnumbered and poorly equipped, the rebels were slaughtered. Boudica either took poison or fell in battle. The sources disagree, but her defeat didn't erase her impact. The Romans learned their lesson. They became more cautious in how they dealt with tribal leaders, and they never forgot the name of the woman who made an empire tremble. Boudica's rebellion wasn't just an uprising. It was a reminder that oppressed people, led by someone with nothing left to lose, can become the most dangerous force of all. And in this case, that force happened to be a mother with a war chariot and a long memory. In the lore of feudal Japan, the image of the samurai is almost always male, a stoic warrior in lacquered armor, loyal to death, sword in hand. But look beyond the cherry blossoms and Bushido scrolls, and you'll find another kind of samurai, one in silk and steel. The Onna Bugeisha, or women warriors, were not only real, they were deadly. Trained in martial arts, archery, and strategy, these noble women were the hidden backbone of many samurai clans. They weren't typically sent into open field battles like their male counterparts, but when their homes, castles, or family honor were at stake, they fought without hesitation and often without mercy. One of the most iconic Onabugeisha was Tomoe Gozen, a 12th century warrior who fought during the Genpei War. Described in the Heike Monogatari, Japan's epic of war and honor, Tomoe was said to be a peerless rider and remarkable archer who could cut down men with one sweep of her katana. She rode into battle like a tempest, wearing full armor, long black hair trailing behind her like a war banner. At the Battle of Asukisaka, she reportedly decapitated a rival samurai in single combat, a final blaze of glory before disappearing from history like a ghost on horseback. Then, there's Nakano Takeko, a 19th century fighter during the Boshin War. She wasn't formally part of the imperial army. Women weren't allowed. So she formed her own unit, an unofficial corps of female warriors who fought with naginata pole weapons. She died, leading a charge against imperial forces, taking a bullet to the chest. Her last request was to be buried with honor by her sister, so the enemy wouldn't claim her body. These women weren't tokens or legends. They were part of the martial tradition, upholding the values of Bushido: loyalty, bravery, and self-sacrifice. Some even received the same training as their male counterparts in times of war. Of course, as Japan modernized and centralized its military power, the Onna Bugeisha were pushed to the margins, their stories reduced to folklore. But the reality remains in Japan's blood-soaked history of samurai clashes and castle sieges. Women's blades were sharpened just as often and just as deadly. The Roman Colosseum, a monument to cruelty, entertainment, and testosterone-fueled violence. Lions, spears, slaves, and sweaty men locked in mortal combat. But what if we told you that sometimes the combatants weren't just men? That buried beneath the mythos of the Roman gladiator is the lesser-known reality of female gladiators, the gladiatrices. While they were rare, these women did exist, and they weren't there to serve snacks. They fought in front of roaring crowds, trained in the same ludus gladiator schools, and were often treated with both titillation and terror. Roman emperors, especially the more theatrically inclined like Nero and Domitian, loved the shock value of women in combat. Female gladiators were novelties, yes, but also formidable warriors in their own right. Evidence is scattered but compelling. A marble relief from Halicarnassus shows two women, Amazon and Aquilia, locked in combat. The carving even notes that they fought to a draw, which was considered an honorable outcome. Their names weren't randomly assigned either. They evoked mythic female warriors, framing these women not as weak imitators, but as ferocious equals. Literary sources also mention them. The satirist Juvenal, never one to miss an opportunity to judge, mocked upper-class women who trained as gladiators, suggesting it was a scandalous rejection of femininity. Others, like Suetonius, note that female fighters sometimes appeared in nighttime spectacles, lit by torches and fueled by wine-soaked crowds who weren't exactly there for a thoughtful display of martial skill. But training was real, and the danger wasn't staged. These women fought with swords, tridents, and nets, just like male gladiators, and they bled just as much. They were often slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals sentenced to the arena. Some were volunteers, gladiators who chose the life of a gladiator for fame, money, or escape from worse fates. In 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from gladiator combat altogether, perhaps worried that Rome's taste for female fighters was becoming a bit too unorthodox, or perhaps because women were proving too good at it. So while they didn't dominate the Colosseum, the gladiatrices carved out a brutal blood-stained space of their own. In the sand, gender meant little. Skill, ferocity, and survival meant everything. The medieval battlefield wasn't just a boys' club with chain mail. While most women were kept far from formal combat roles, some didn't get the memo or ignored it on purpose, whether disguising themselves as men, leading troops as abbesses, or simply refusing to stay in the convent when swords started swinging. Medieval women found ways to fight, both literally and symbolically. One of the strangest categories of warrior women, the warrior nuns. During the Crusades, certain religious women did more than pray for victory. They picked up weapons. While most did so defensively, records exist of abbesses and nuns taking command when their convents or lands were threatened. In the 12th century, the abbess of Quedlinburg was a spiritual leader and a military one, commanding vassals in battle as the head of a powerful religious territory. She didn't wear armor, but she sure gave orders like a general. Then there were women who simply became men, at least on paper. Medieval records reveal multiple cases of women disguising themselves in male clothing to enlist in armies. Some were caught and executed, others passed undetected for years. One example is the story of a woman known only as John, who served in an English garrison during the Hundred Years' War. When discovered, her comrades reportedly shrugged and let her continue, because she fought just as hard as they did. Joan of Arc, of course, is the superstar of this category. A teenage peasant girl who claimed divine visions, dressed in men's armor, and led the French army to victories that stunned Europe. But for every Joan, there were dozens of unnamed women who didn't have visions or sainthood, just grit and opportunity. Even outside of the battlefield, women played tactical roles. Noble women in besieged castles often coordinated defenses, rationed supplies, and negotiated with enemy forces. Eleanor of Aquitaine, while not a sword-swinging warrior, accompanied her husband on crusade and was rumored to have worn armor. Whether as a statement, protection, or performance is still debated. The point? The Middle Ages weren't nearly as monolithic as they seem. Women found loopholes in rigid systems, snuck past the rules, or simply made up new ones. And while history didn't always record their names, it certainly felt their presence on the battlefield. When people think of the medieval Islamic world, they might imagine flowing robes, caliphs in grand courts, or scholars debating science and philosophy. What they often miss, the women who picked up swords, led armies, and defended cities when men were too slow, too dead, or too distracted by politics. Take Kala Binta Lakwa, for example, a name that still echoes through Arab folklore like a war cry. A 7th century warrior during the early Muslim conquests, she fought alongside her brother in battle. After he was captured by Byzantine forces, she stormed the enemy lines in black armor, wielding her sword with such precision that soldiers mistook her for Khalid ibn al-Walid, the famed general known as the Sword of Allah. When her identity was revealed, morale didn't drop. It soared. She had earned her place among warriors through sheer skill and nerve. Women like Kayla weren't just battlefield anomalies. In times of crisis, especially during sieges, women took up arms to defend their homes and cities. During the Mongol invasions of the 13th century, as the Khwarezmian Empire crumbled, there are accounts of women fighting in the streets of Nishapur and other cities, flinging stones, wielding daggers, and turning their homes into fortresses. They were never formally trained, but desperation is a powerful teacher. Further west, in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, noble women weren't cloistered either. Some wielded considerable political and military influence. Wada bint al-Mustakfi, while best known as a poet, lived in a world where women of her class often ran estates and defended them during civil unrest. A few centuries later, during the Reconquista, Muslim women sometimes joined their husbands in defending the last strongholds of Granada. There's also Sida al-Hura, not a battlefield warrior, but a pirate queen. In the 16th century, she commanded fleets in the western Mediterranean, striking fear into European ships. Allied with the infamous Barbarossa of the Ottoman Navy, she was a political leader and naval commander, a double threat on sea and shore. In many Islamic societies, the ideal of modesty coexisted with the reality of necessity. When cities burned and armies failed, the veil came off and the sword came out, and in those moments, history remembered them, not as women who broke the rules, but as warriors who rewrote them. For centuries, history books told us that war was a man's domain. Men led, men fought, men died gloriously, while women waited, wept, or patched wounds in the background. But scratch the surface, and a different story bleeds through. A story of women who didn't wait to be invited to the fight. They crashed the battlefield, often with more guts than glory. From the Scythian horse archers who likely inspired the Amazon myth, to African queens who outmaneuvered empires, to women gladiators drawing blood in the sand, every continent has its tales of female warriors. Sometimes they were leaders born into power, like Queen Amina or Boudica. Sometimes they were commoners who stepped up when chaos left no other option, like the medieval cross-dressers or the women defending ancient cities from siege. What unites them isn't just courage, it's the refusal to be erased. The legacy of these women isn't measured by how many battles they won, but by how many rules they broke. They defied cultural norms, religious expectations, and political boundaries. They forced generals, emperors, and chroniclers to revise their assumptions. In many cases, that meant being deliberately written out of the record. After all, what empire wants to admit it was rattled by a woman with a spear? And yet, the traces remain, in bones buried with weapons, in poems, in scratched notes from historians who didn't know what to make of them, in oral traditions, songs, and temple murals. The stories survived, not always intact, not always celebrated, but alive enough to inspire generations that followed. Modern military history has only recently begun to fully acknowledge the breadth of women's contributions to warfare. It's not about placing women above men in battle. It's about recognizing that they were always there, even when they were never supposed to be. So the next time someone calls women in war an exception, remind them, from the deserts of North Africa to the snowy steppes of Central Asia, from castle sieges to chariot charges, women weren't just part of the war story. They were the plot twist, the hidden edge, the blade history tried to sheath, but never could. Because once a sword is drawn, it doesn't care who's holding it, only what they're willing to do with it. He forbade unnecessary slaughter. When tribes surrendered, he offered them land and autonomy, not annihilation. Even on the battlefield, he clung to stoic principles like a man clinging to a raft in a storm. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who valued tranquility more than glory had become one of Rome's most battle-worn emperors. Yet he bore it all with grim grace. He wasn't fighting for conquest or fame. He was fighting to protect a crumbling empire, and perhaps to test whether philosophy could survive in the mud and blood of real life. Spoiler, it could. While Marcus Aurelius commanded legions and dealt with border invasions, his most enduring legacy wasn't forged with a sword, but with a pen. Amid tents, snow, and the groans of wounded soldiers, Marcus began writing what we now call Meditations, a collection of deeply personal reflections on life, virtue, suffering, and death. He didn't write it to impress anyone. These weren't public declarations or propaganda. They were reminders to himself, mental armor, notes from a man desperately trying to stay humane while presiding over a world unraveling. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That's not the voice of an emperor basking in glory. That's someone reminding himself to live with integrity, even when no one's watching. The text reveals a constant inner struggle. Marcus battled not just Germanic tribes, but his own impulses, anger, pride, despair. In one passage, he reminds himself not to expect gratitude. In another, he muses that even emperors are forgotten dust. Soon, you will have forgotten all things, he writes, and soon all things will have forgotten you. Cheery stuff, unless you're a Stoic. Stoicism, after all, wasn't about joy or control. It was about accepting reality, however brutal, and choosing virtue in every moment. For Marcus, that meant doing his job, showing up, leading justly, not losing his head when plagues and wars spun everything into chaos. He wasn't trying to escape suffering. He was trying to suffer well. Meditations was written in Greek, the intellectual language of the time, and filled with quotes from Epictetus and other Stoic sages. But it's also shockingly modern. Marcus worried about burnout. He advised himself to stay calm around difficult people. He reminded himself that fame is fleeting, pleasure is overrated, and death is natural. It's like the original self-help manual, minus the smiling influencer and affiliate link. What makes meditations remarkable is its humanity. Here was the most powerful man in the known world, sitting by candlelight, trying to be decent and often doubting he was. He didn't preach perfection. He preached effort. The effort to be just, kind, rational, even when surrounded by disease, war, betrayal, and mortality. And that's why his words still resonate today, because Marcus didn't just rule Rome, he ruled himself. While Marcus Aurelius was busy managing invasions and maintaining inner peace through philosophy, his personal life was less than tranquil. He married Faustina the Younger, the daughter of Emperor Antoninus Pius, a political union, but one that, at least on paper, seemed affectionate. Together, they had 13 children. 13. But ancient Rome wasn't kind to young lives. Only a handful survived past infancy. Marcus buried 8 of his own children. Just pause and imagine that. A man who daily pondered impermanence in his writings had to live it over and over. While Meditations rarely names these personal losses directly, the tone, somber, resolute, aching, hints at grief barely held at bay. Stoicism didn't eliminate pain, it just gave him tools to bear it. Then there was the drama around Faustina. Roman historians, often more fond of gossip than facts, accused her of everything from infidelity to treason. Cassius Dio and the notoriously salacious Historia Augusta claimed she had affairs with gladiators, soldiers, and possibly plotted against Marcus. But Marcus never publicly condemned her. In fact, he honored her memory after her death in 175 CE with temples, coins, and statues. Either he didn't believe the rumors, or he chose forgiveness over scandal. But family tensions didn't end there. One surviving son, Commodus, was being groomed to rule. And let's just say, Commodus was not his father's son in temperament or philosophy. While Marcus was scribbling meditations on humility and restraint, young Commodus was reportedly more interested in extravagant displays, wrestling matches, and self-glorification. Still, Marcus clung to the Roman tradition of hereditary succession. Despite signs that Commodus might be a dangerous choice, Marcus refused to break with custom. He named Commodus co-emperor in 177 CE, a decision that would cast a long dark shadow over his legacy. At home and abroad, the pressures mounted. Marcus rarely had a moment of peace, if not from external chaos, then from private heartbreak. But he never abandoned his duties. He continued issuing legal reforms, supporting philosophy, and stabilizing an empire beset on all sides by change and decay. Through it all, Marcus Aurelius remained composed, committed, and above all, human. A ruler who was constantly tested not just by the sword, but by the weight of love, loss, and legacy. As if plagues, invasions, and family tragedy weren't enough, Marcus Aurelius also had to contend with betrayal, the kind that cuts deepest when it comes from inside the tent. In 175 CE, a respected general named Avidius Cassius declared himself emperor. This wasn't some obscure provincial revolt. Cassius was the governor of Syria and a man Marcus had trusted with immense military authority. And it wasn't entirely his fault either. A false rumor had reached Cassius. Marcus was dead. Rather than verify the facts, Cassius moved fast. He accepted the imperial title, hoping to seize power before the Senate or other legions reacted. It was a classic case of Roman ambition running faster than Roman news. The East braced for civil war. But Marcus, he didn't panic. He didn't scream betrayal. He simply began preparing for a march east, not for vengeance, but for reconciliation. Incredibly, Marcus even considered pardoning Cassius. He believed in clemency, in preserving unity above pride. His letters and thoughts show a man determined to prevent more bloodshed, even if it meant forgiving a man who tried to steal his crown. It was the ultimate stoic move, keeping calm not just in chaos, but in the face of personal insult. But Marcus never got the chance to demonstrate that mercy. Before he could reach the east, Cassius was assassinated by his own officers, likely fearful of what the emperor's arrival would mean for them. His head was sent to Marcus as a gift. Marcus reportedly wept. To Marcus, rebellion wasn't just a threat to Rome's authority, it was a tragedy. It symbolized the weakening fabric of imperial loyalty, the creeping instability that would eventually choke the empire. In the wake of the rebellion, Marcus traveled through the eastern provinces, not with rage, but with ritual. He performed public ceremonies, reaffirmed loyalty, and ensured that no one, especially the soldiers, misunderstood his intentions. But the cracks in the empire were widening. The plague had hollowed out the population. The borders were still bleeding. And now, even Rome's inner circle had begun to fracture. Marcus saw it all, and still believed in reason, in justice, in virtue. Even as Rome began to unravel at the seams, he tried to stitch it back together, one stoic breath at a time. As Marcus Aurelius approached the end of his life, he wasn't resting on laurels or reclining in a marble villa. He was once again on the frontier, knee-deep in military operations against the Germanic tribes along the Danube. Despite his age and deteriorating health, he returned to the battlefield because duty didn't retire, and neither did Marcus. The Marcomannic Wars had dragged on for years, draining Roman resources and morale. Marcus knew this wasn't just about territory, it was about survival. The Germanic tribes weren't raiding for sport. They were being pushed south by other migrating groups, part of a domino effect that would eventually lead to the fall of Rome centuries later. But in the 1700s CE, Marcus was still doing everything he could to hold the line. He reorganized the frontier defenses, resettled refugee tribes as loyal Roman allies, and continued writing philosophical reflections between campaigns. In one eerie passage from Meditations, he reminds himself, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you." These weren't abstract musings. They were the thoughts of a man acutely aware that his end was near. In 180 CE, while stationed in present-day Vienna, Marcus Aurelius fell seriously ill, likely from the same plague that had haunted his reign. According to sources, he summoned his son Commodus to his side and offered him advice. Whether philosophical, practical, or desperate is lost to history. What we do know is that Marcus died shortly after, on March 17th, 180 CE, surrounded not by senators or scribes, but by soldiers. His death marked the end of what many historians call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It also marked the end of Rome's age of philosopher kings. Commodus would inherit the throne and, spoiler alert, he was no Marcus. Rome's decline wouldn't begin with a bang, but with the quiet closing of Marcus's eyes and the slow unraveling of his legacy. There was no triumphal parade, no grand final speech, just a dying emperor in a cold northern outpost, doing what he always did, enduring, reflecting, and fulfilling his role to the very end. Marcus didn't seek immortality through monuments. He sought it through character, and in that, he succeeded. Marcus Aurelius had spent his life preaching moderation, discipline, and reason. So naturally, the gods handed him Commodus. When Marcus died in 180 CE, he left the empire in the hands of a 19-year-old who seemed less interested in stoic virtue and more in gladiatorial cosplay. Commodus liked to dress as Hercules, battle in the arena, and referred to himself as the Roman Hercules, because humility clearly skipped a generation. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. Under Commodus, Rome descended into decadence, paranoia, and administrative chaos. He alienated the Senate, indulged in lavish spectacles, and executed rivals on a whim. Where Marcus had treated power as a sacred burden, Commodus treated it like a reality show prize. Bread and circuses became the rule of the day. So the question has haunted historians ever since. Why did Marcus, the wise philosopher, the reflective emperor, leave the empire to such a man? Was it blind love, a misjudgment, or did Marcus, so bound to tradition and the Roman idea of dynastic continuity, feel he simply had no choice? In truth, Marcus had options. He could have chosen a capable general or senator as his successor. He could have broken with tradition, as Emperor Nerva once had, by adopting a worthy heir. But he didn't. He named Commodus co-emperor in 177 CE, perhaps hoping his son would learn by example. Spoiler, he didn't. It's one of the great ironies of ancient history that the emperor who wrote Meditations, a work of enduring wisdom on human nature, couldn't or wouldn't prevent his own son from becoming the poster child for imperial failure. And Marcus wasn't blind to his son's flaws. There are hints, even in his writings, of disappointment and warning about flattery, pride, indulgence, all traits that Commodus embraced with enthusiasm. Still, Marcus never disowned him. Whether out of love, obligation, or exhaustion, he passed the torch and then watched the fire consume the house. Commodus's rule would end in assassination, and his death would plunge Rome into the year of the 5 emperors. It's a bleak postscript to a reign defined by stoic resilience. Marcus had kept the empire stitched together with wisdom and will. Commodus tore it open with ego and spectacle. And yet, perhaps the ultimate stoic lesson lies here too. Even emperors cannot control the future, only how they meet it. Marcus Aurelius died nearly 2,000 years ago, but his influence has never really left us. He was a rare kind of ruler, not just a man of power, but a man of principle. His meditations, scribbled during wars and sleepless nights, survived the fall of empires, the rise of religions, and the passage of time to become one of the most treasured philosophical texts in history. His legacy is paradoxical. As an emperor, he faced relentless war, plague, rebellion, and personal loss. Yet he remains admired not for victories or monuments, but for his mind, his restraint, his compassion, his refusal to be corrupted by absolute power. He didn't style himself as divine. He didn't demand worship. He wrote, in plain Greek, how to be a better human. Do every act of your life as though it were the very last act of your life. Even modern thinkers, from statesmen to CEOs, athletes to psychologists, still quote Marcus Aurelius. His words appear on posters, in therapy sessions, in business guides, and in quiet moments of personal crisis. Why? Because he didn't speak like a king. He spoke like a flawed human, trying desperately to stay upright in a collapsing world. Yet Marcus's legacy is also bittersweet. Despite his wisdom, his reign marked the beginning of the end for Rome's golden age. His son Commodus accelerated the decline, and future emperors would rarely match his dignity or restraint. It's as if Marcus was the empire's last heartbeat of moral clarity before the fever set in. And perhaps that's the most haunting part of his story, that the man who understood impermanence better than anyone left behind something strangely permanent. His empire crumbled, his bloodline faltered, but his meditations, raw, intimate, unpolished, survived. They survived because they were never meant to. They were never edited, never prepared for an audience. And that's what makes them immortal. They are the private whispers of a public man, the diary of an emperor who wanted nothing more than to live well, die justly, and leave the world no worse than he found it. And in the end, maybe that's all any of us can hope to do. Marcus did it in sandals, on horseback, with a stylus in hand, one stoic breath at a time. The laws of Manu, compiled between the 2nd century BCE and the 3rd century CE, were not laws in the modern sense. Rather, they functioned as spiritual and social guidelines that deeply influenced Indian legal thought for centuries. These texts addressed topics such as property rights, inheritance, marriage contracts, and punishments. Central to this legal vision was the caste system. Brahmins, priests, kshatriyas, warriors, vaishyas, merchants, and shudras, laborers, were each subject to distinct rules and penalties. For example, a Brahmin might face a fine or ritual exclusion for an offense, whereas a Shudra committing the same act could be subjected to physical punishment. Justice in ancient India was hierarchical and closely tied to one's birth. However, it was not entirely devoid of mercy. Intent and repentance mattered. Wrongdoers could mitigate their punishment through penance or acts of charity, and judges were encouraged to consider the moral and spiritual disposition of the accused. Kings served as the highest judicial authority, advised by Brahmin scholars and ministers, blending divine law with royal authority. When evidence was inconclusive, trials by ordeal were sometimes used. These trials involved painful tests, such as walking on hot iron or retrieving items from boiling oil, believed to reveal guilt or innocence through divine intervention. Though harsh, these ordeals were considered a last resort and aimed to restore dharma, the moral order, rather than simply punish. Across ancient civilizations, when human justice faltered due to a lack of evidence, unreliable witnesses, or unprovable accusations, societies often turned to the gods for resolution. One of the most extreme responses was trial by ordeal, used in Babylon, India, and later in medieval Europe. The logic was simple and brutal. If human justice failed, divine justice would be revealed through suffering. In Babylon, for instance, an accused person might be thrown into a river. If they survived, they were considered innocent. If they drowned, guilt was assumed. The river, viewed as sacred and impartial, was believed to deliver divine judgment. In India, the Dharma Shastras described various forms of ordeal, including handling red-hot iron, walking through fire, or exposure to venom. The belief was that the gods would protect the innocent from harm. In some cases, ordeals were symbolic or spiritual, such as swearing oaths in sacred spaces. Violating such oaths was thought to invite divine punishment, either immediately or in the afterlife. Though disturbing by modern standards, these ordeals reflected a sincere desire for justice, especially in situations where human systems failed. They also served as psychological deterrents, instilling fear in the guilty and reinforcing communal trust in divine fairness. Importantly, kings and peasants alike could be subjected to them, reflecting a strange form of equality. Suffering was the ultimate court, and the gods were the final judges. In ancient Egypt, justice flowed not from courts or laws, but directly from the divine authority of the pharaoh. As both monarch and living god, the pharaoh embodied Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. Administering justice was a sacred duty, not just a political one. The pharaoh held ultimate legal authority. He could overrule judgments, pardon criminals, and issue or rewrite laws. However, a bureaucratic network extended across Egypt, staffed by royal officials and local magistrates who implemented justice in alignment with Ma'at. Rather than a fixed legal code, Egyptian justice relied on precedent, royal decrees, and scribal tradition. Court proceedings ranged from informal councils in villages to formal trials in major cities. These often included oaths, witness testimony, and written records. False accusations were punished harshly, sometimes with the same penalties the defendant would have faced. Punishments varied: restitution, flogging, forced labor, or execution, with crimes against temples or royal property punished especially severely. Still, the system valued rehabilitation. Voluntary confessions often led to reduced sentences. Egyptian justice fused absolute power with a strong moral expectation. The pharaoh was not just feared, but revered as the guardian of universal harmony. In stark contrast to divine monarchy, ancient Greece especially democratic Athens, pioneered a citizen centered approach to justice. Here, law and order were public responsibilities, not royal decrees. Two main institutions governed justice: the ecclesia, citizen assembly, and the heliaia, popular court, composed of hundreds of citizen jurors selected by lot. There were no judges in the modern sense. Magistrates organized trials, but it was the jurors, often 500 or more, who determined verdicts and penalties. There were no appeals, no sequestered juries, and no legal representation. Litigants argued their own cases or hired speechwriters, making persuasion more critical than evidence. This system encouraged civic participation, but also left justice vulnerable to rhetorical manipulation. Some mechanisms, like ostracism, allowed citizens to vote annually to exile anyone deemed a threat to democracy, without a trial or any formal charges. Despite its flaws, Athenian justice introduced revolutionary ideas: peer judgment, open debate, and the notion that law belongs to the people. It was imperfect, emotional, and easily swayed, but it was participatory. In Athens, the courtroom was a stage, the citizen a performer, and justice a shared civic drama. In India, justice was inseparable from karma, the belief that every action has moral and spiritual consequences in this life and the next. Unlike the civic model of Athens or the divine monarchy of Egypt, Indian justice emphasized internal accountability. Karma was not a legal mechanism, but a moral truth rooted in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist traditions. A wrongdoer might escape human punishment, but cosmic justice was inevitable. Legal texts like the Manusmriti and Dharma Shastras outlined duties and laws for every caste and social role. Kings were expected to uphold Dharma, and failure to do so carried spiritual consequences. Buddhism, emerging in the 5th century BCE, challenged caste-based legal inequality and emphasized universal moral values like compassion, nonviolence, and truthfulness. Emperor Ashoka, influenced by Buddhist ethics, famously renounced war and restructured his empire around moral governance. His rock edicts promoted mercy, tolerance, and the ethical responsibilities of rulers. In this view, justice wasn't just about courts or laws. It was about intention, self-discipline, and alignment with cosmic order. A king could escape rebellion, but not karmic retribution. This internalized model of justice, deeply personal and spiritually grounded, was, for many, far more compelling than external authority. Even today, the justice systems of Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and India continue to shape modern legal thought. Babylon gave us codified law and the principle of proportionate punishment. Egypt introduced the fusion of morality and authority, reflected in modern restorative justice. Greece laid the foundation for jury trials and civic participation. India added spiritual depth and personal responsibility through karma and dharma. These systems were far from perfect. They were hierarchical, patriarchal, and often brutal. Yet they asked profound questions we still grapple with today. Who defines justice? Is it rooted in divine authority, public consensus, or moral truth? Should law be equal for all, or adapted to social roles? How do we reconcile punishment with compassion? Modern legal systems are more structured and humane, but they still carry the DNA of these ancient ideas. We continue to carve laws into stone, figuratively, expecting them to uphold order. We still debate justice in courts, parliaments, and public forums, and we still wrestle with the eternal tension between power and fairness, law and morality, crime and consequence. In many ways, the pursuit of justice remains as ancient and as urgent as ever.